Traders, how are you? Marcello, founder of the Day Trading Academy. Today we're doing the recap of what happened in the markets last week. So overall, the overarching story this week, which affected quite a bit the markets and the economies overall, was the agreement between China and the United States. They have supposedly a phase one deal to stop the trade war, and also there was a huge election win for the conservatives, the right. It's backwards for you guys, so it's my right, but for you guys it's the right, the conservatives in the UK. They had their biggest win since, I'm not mistaken, Margaret Thatcher. I believe it was the 1960s. I'll confirm the date here in just a moment for you. So overall on Monday, U.S. stocks closed lower. Then they closed higher again Wednesday and Thursday after the Fed stated that they're going to hold rates steady and they're not going to change the rates at all in the near term. S&P 500 then hits a record high after Trump tweeted that we were very close to a trade deal with China. And then finally on Friday, we had a move higher as Trump announced that we eventually had a phase one trade deal. The S&P 500, don't know if I mentioned, actually hit a record high this week as well. U.S. indices overall are higher. The Dow went up 0.15%. The S&P 500 went up 0.73%. The NASDAQ went up 0.90%. World stocks hit a record high on Thursday as well, passing an all-time peak set in early 2018 with the enthusiasm from investors on the U.S. and China trade war optimism that we're going to get a deal, which eventually did happen. European markets were mostly higher. Spain went up 1.93%, with Russia being the biggest winner at 2.32%. In Latin America and Canada, the markets are mostly higher as well, with Mexico being the biggest winner at 5.52%. Africa and the Middle East, we had a mixed bag, the biggest economy, 2 negative, 2 positive, with South Africa being the biggest winner at 2.61%, Egypt the biggest loser at just under 2%. Asian and Australian markets, Hong Kong the biggest winner at 4.53%, and my dear Philippines, all my traders out there, they had the biggest winner at 0.9. They had one of the winners, I should say, not the biggest winner, that was Hong Kong at 0.97%. Bitcoin lower again this week, negative 2.65%, and went down to $7,165.99. And in news from the financial and banking sector, Morgan Stanley, which is a huge investment house, if you guys don't know what that is, basically it's a bank for the stock market. Think of it that way, right? They don't receive deposits, at least not them anyway, since they're combined with another company. But it's the financial entity that we use to be able to invest in the stock market. They estimate that global stocks have seen a near $175 billion in inflows in September. Since September, 2/3 of that heading to the United States. And I quote, they say, as long as central banks keep pumping liquidity in and trade negotiations don't break down, little reason to think this uptrend in stocks can't continue. Expansion in the U.S. Fed's balance sheet continues at $72.8 billion in temporary liquidity, even though this is actually QE4. This is the 4th time now that they're literally just, creating money out of thin air, just throwing it into the financial system. The Fed Chairman Powell, which is the Fed chair of the Central Bank in the United States, said that it's not quantitative easing, but essentially it is. Everybody kind of knows it is. And as a result of the Conservative elected victor in the UK, the sterling, the pound in the UK went up by 2.5%, which was the biggest rise in nearly 3 years. And a lot of the shares in companies in the British economy soared, bringing gains to about 1.8% on the main stock exchange. Some of you guys have asked me about what I think about the UK leaving the European Union. I think in the short term, it's not going to be a good thing, but in the long run, it's going to be a great thing because they're not going to be tied down with a huge bureaucratic, high taxes, big government mess that is Europe. It works for some countries, for example, like Germany, because they're super efficient, right? So they kind of make up kind of around the edges. But I think in the long run, it'll be better for them due to the fact that they'll be able to make their own decisions and not have to rely on the entire continent because they're a little bit more, let's say, I think the culture in the UK is a little bit different than that of Europe, right? They're a little bit less socialist. They have a little bit more entrepreneurial talent as well. So, the mentality kind of, that's why they voted to get out, right? Because they clash a little bit. In commodities, crude oil futures, the U.S. crude is up 1.47%. International crude, which is called Brent, went up 1.29%. The United States did become an exporter for the first time in 70 years in September. They exported 89,000 more barrels than they imported, and nearly 152,000 new American jobs were created in the energy sector in 2018. 7% of all new jobs reported, and the surging U.S. production is keeping a lid on prices in 2020. And from precious metals this week, gold went up to 1.10% to 1,476, with silver at 2.10% at 1,702. In political news, good sign for French President Macron. The only, it's really funny. Every time I hear a French accent, the only thing I think of is bullshit. That's what I think it's one of the funniest things ever. But anyway, so on Tuesday, the protests that they had because of the situation there seemed to have dropped. There seemed to be less people in the streets, so that's a good sign for Macron. Algeria's new president, Tebboune, is facing the biggest political crisis in decades. Problems with the economy, also attacks on his legitimacy since he had a low vote turnout when he did win the election. And the UK now, since the Tories win, which are the Conservatives, leaning more towards the right. And again, just want to remind you, never going to get political on this program. I try to be kind of neutral, just report the facts to understand what they mean. So it doesn't matter if you're right, left, center, black, white, purple, green, love Trump, hate Trump, love Obama, hate Obama. At the end of the day, I just want to report the facts. Just want to always remind you guys of that, because I think most of us, and comment here in the video if you guys can, I think most of us are kind of tired of all this politicized content online in the news. That's why I never watch the news anymore, because it's just everything is always politicized. So because they had an absolute huge win, they had the biggest win since 1987. And the Labour, which is more of the left, suffered its biggest defeat since 1935. Now they're definitely going to try to move very quickly with the Brexit to remove Brexit, or the UK, I should say, out of the European Union. It ended 3 years of uncertainty after they decided, or they voted to leave the EU. And out of 650 parliamentary seats, the Conservative Party won 364. He now has an absolute majority to be able to do whatever he wants with the economy. Scotland, which has been a part of the UK for 300 years, the SNPs that likely won 48 of the 59 seats in the National Parliament are going to send a letter to Johnson, the party leader, Nicola Sturgeon, to be able to approve a new independence referendum, since when they did vote, they didn't include the actual Brexit. In corporate news, Saudi Arabia's Aramco rose 10% after they started trading publicly for the first time, raising the company's valuation to $1.88 trillion on Wednesday. Shares rose to $10.32 on the second day of public trading, pushing to a record valuation of $2 trillion, nearly $1 trillion higher than the next public company. We're talking huge numbers here. And Twitter also is planning to set up a decentralized and open system for social networks to be able to use one platform to access a bunch of different, to try to use one platform, let's say, right? So we have Twitter and LinkedIn and Instagram, and who uses Facebook anymore, right? YouTube, and try to do it all on one platform. In trade news, representatives from the United States, Mexico, and Canada are heading to Mexico if the agreement that was created by the Trump administration, which is called USMCA, to replace NAFTA. If it does go through Congress, it is going to replace the 26-year-old NAFTA and encompass $1.2 trillion in annual trade across the continent. In technology, the Communist Party in China is ordering all state offices to remove foreign hardware and software within 3 years. 20% in 2022, 3 years away, 50% in 2021, 2 years away, and 30% in 2020, which is next year. And this is definitely going to hurt companies like Microsoft, Dell, and HP. AT&T has now switched on its 5G service for 10 major U.S. markets as it begins selling the Samsung Galaxy Note 10 Plus to take advantage of the network. They're calling the low-band 5G for consumers, and they're also calling it high-band 5G for businesses, large stadiums, and campuses. In investment news, a legal case which encompasses a coalition of 13 states their attorney generals are going to face off against T-Mobile and Sprint over their $26.5 billion merger. The Department of Justice and the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission, already allowed the deal to proceed. And Sprint is going to have to sell their prepaid cell phone services, which includes Boost and Virgin Mobile, to Dish Network. So we'll see how that pans out. Going on a global index, Europe remains by far the most prepared region for e-commerce. A study done by UNCTAD, Business to Consumer e-commerce UNCTAD's Business to Consumer e-commerce index. According to that, Europe has the top 8 countries in the top 10 when it scored 152 nations with the readiness to be able to support online shopping. Online shopping did support in 2017 $3.9 trillion globally, which is a rise of 22% from the previous year. Tesla is planning to invest $4.4 billion in a factory that's going to produce 500,000 electric vehicles per year. The factory is going to be just on the outskirts of Berlin in Germany, and it's going to create 10,000 jobs, and they want to start construction in 2020. And efforts to secure domestic supplies of rare earth metals to make electronics and military weapons. The U.S. Army is going to plan to fund the construction of the processing facilities. It's the first financial investment in a commercial project for rare earth production since the 1940s Manhattan Project, which created the first atomic bomb during World War II. International events, Hong Kong protests continue this weekend, even though now they have the permission of the government to go ahead and do so. And Turkey may finalize its terms for the 4th delivery of a second round of S-400 advanced missiles from Russia by April 2020, when the first round is going to be ready to operate. Turkey has already agreed for 2 consignments of these missiles called the S-400s from Russia. And this is obviously a very big crisis between the United States and NATO, because NATO is technically a military union, let's say, which Turkey is a part of. So they really shouldn't be going out and supposedly buying missiles from what the U.S. says is the enemy, which is Russia. So that might cause sanctions against Russia. Sanctions against Turkey. And EU leaders have agreed to cut the bloc's greenhouse gas emissions to net zero by 2050. The only holdout was Poland, since they have about 80% of their energy is from coal, one of the worst polluters of the environment, the environmentalists say, and they're seeking financial assurances to safeguard its economy. And in unusual facts this week, the movie Frozen 2 from Disney brought in another $125 million worldwide, pushing global sales past $10 billion for this year. The studio already broke the annual global box record back in July. The Lion King remake pushed the firm past its $7.6 billion record set in 2016, and that actually doesn't include the purchase that they made for 20th Century Fox, which includes Star Wars, which netted about $2 billion this year. They're still most likely are going to receive about $500 plus million in sales by 2019. U.S. House of Representatives and Senate Armed Services Committee reached a deal on the absolutely massive $738 billion defense bill. It provides pay hikes and will prohibit the transfer of F-35s to Turkey, establishes the U.S. Space Force as the 6th armed service of the United States, but it is still under the Air Force. And last but not least, the United Nations Development Program reports that Latin America is significantly reduced its poverty in the last 2 decades. I think in Colombia alone, extreme poverty went down, I think, from 60% to 30%, right around those numbers. I remember looking that up recently. And the general discontent, because we do have protesters in Venezuela and Colombia. In Colombia, it's not that bad, by the way. Here, it hasn't been that bad at all. In Chile, it's been pretty bad. They started setting metro stations on fire, the subway stations, in Argentina as well. The discontent now, they're saying that it isn't about income, it's more about lack of equity, environmental development, and gaps in technology and education. That's the news for this week, guys. Let me know if you guys have any questions. Don't forget to subscribe and put all your questions with the hashtag AskMarcello. I'll be happy to pull them. See you next week.